Plenty of reaction from the NFL scouting combine, that and more on today's episode of Locked On Bucs.
You are Locked On Buccaneers, your daily Tampa Bay Buccaneers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, and welcome into this episode of Locked On Bucs, your daily podcast covering the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I want to thank you for making Locked On Bucs your first listen or view every day. Don't forget you can subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. And of course, you can follow along on Twitter. I am James Yarcho at @JYarcho_Bucs. Credentialed member of the media covering your Tampa Bay Buccaneers, here with you every Monday through Friday along with the everydayers. And for that, I want to share my appreciation for your continued support of the show. One of the ways you can support the show is become a Locked On Bucs insider. You're going to get news, rumors, updates, general thoughts, one-on-one conversations with me via text message. Go to joinsubtext.com/LockedOnBucs or click the link in the show notes to become an insider today. I apologize for my surroundings. Definitely not going to be as animated as I usually am. Have to have respect for the for my neighbors. I am recording here at my hotel in Indianapolis to bring you the latest on the scouting combine. Lots to talk about from Wednesday's action. And of course, we are going to talk about the roster move that the Bucs ended up pseudo making. That is all coming up in a little bit, but it was definitely a busy morning here in Indianapolis with the edge rushers and the linebackers taking the podium. So I wanted to go through and drop really some of my biggest takeaways from everything that transpired on Wednesday morning. And first and foremost, I did miss the first group of edge rushers because apparently the parking garage that I prepaid to get into was hidden somewhere that it wasn't possible to find in morning rush hour. So that was a lot of fun. It caused me to miss JTT there from Ohio State, who I have talked about quite a bit this week. But there were plenty of other prospects out there that had spoken with the Buccaneers, had some interesting tidbits. All that said, I want to start this show off with Oregon linebacker Jeffrey Bassa. So that's a guy that I took in both of my mock drafts here on Mock Draft Monday this week, and I haven't really talked about him much on the show in depth outside of taking him in some mock drafts. This is a guy that a lot of the insiders have texted me about saying, they're really interested in him. So, of course, I was keeping them updated on Bassa and talking with him, hearing from him at the podium. But Bassa is a linebacker that converted from safety. So he's now learning kind of the linebacker position on the fly at a major, major program after playing safety his freshman year. And as far as learning the linebacker position, he did it extremely well over the last 2 years there with the Ducks. And one of the Buccaneers' biggest issues last season, of course, was linebackers being terrible in coverage. A player like Bassa fixes that immediately. And he told us on Wednesday that it doesn't matter if it's a running back out of the backfield, a tight end going vertically, covering a receiver in the slot. There is no such thing as a mismatch when he's the linebacker dropping in coverage. He's confident about going up against all of those guys because of his background playing in the secondary. And that's exactly the kind of linebacker that the Bucs have to add, whether it's in the draft or in free agency. And I mentioned before that Kiser is kind of a Swiss Army knife at linebacker, but Bassa is more of a natural fit in the Buccaneers defense at that inside linebacker spot. You have the versatility of him moving around and being a guy that you can drop into coverage, but he's also going to be beneficial in stopping the run, and he can get after the quarterback. Better news for some of you that already like Bassa. Some of you insiders, I texted them about it, but he told us that he formally met with the Buccaneers, so that includes Todd Bowles and Jason Licht, those formal meetings, and he said that he loved meeting with them. He would love to be in a defense like the one that Tampa has, and then playing alongside Levante David for a team with such a rich linebacker history would be a dream scenario for him. And then he also spoke about the Senior Bowl and how that was a great test for him to go against a lot of the other top talents in this draft class. And it showed him kind of where he is versus where he could be, that he feels his technique is good, but he's not going to rest until he's elite across the board. Right now, Bassa is trending up from where his stock was kind of during the first part of the college season, and he's becoming more of a third round guy. Early in the mock draft process, he was an early fifth to fourth round pick. He's working his way up the draft boards into the third round. And a big part of that was his day at the Senior Bowl, or his week at the Senior Bowl. Expect that stock to continue to rise. I'm not sure that he gets all the way to the end of the second round, but he has definitely solidified himself as a day two guy. The Buccaneers, if he ends up falling to them and they have not addressed linebacker by that point, the Bucs could find themselves a starter and who could come in and really, really help with the coverage issues that they had at the linebacker spot. That gives you Levante, if he returns, along with Bassa, Servassier Dennis, using those two guys as kind of a platoon. And then you can even really think about bringing in Servassier Dennis as an additional pass rusher. So Bassa can drop back and be solid in coverage. Levante can do Levante things. Why not bring in Servassier Dennis? Help out Yaya Diaby, help out Chris Braswell or whoever the other edge rusher is, and become an additional pass rusher. That way you have Antoine in coverage. You don't have to send either of your safeties. You have a linebacker that can cover really well. The amount of ways that Todd Bowles can really play with that kind of alignment would be really, really interesting and really beneficial compared to what we saw in Buccaneers pass coverage last year. But if you want to check out some of the impressive things that Bassa can do, check out his games against UCLA, Washington, and Wisconsin. Really, really solid stuff there. And then he wasn't the only one that was impressive and jumped out to me. Mykel Williams, who's certainly been linked to the Bucs in plenty of these mock drafts. He was really, really fun to hear from. I knew that he was dealing with some injury stuff, but I wasn't really sure to what extent. I don't think anybody was really sure to what extent he was dealing with injury. And he actually kind of poked at the media about it, saying that they didn't get the full story on him, didn't bother to ask him the full story before they kind of ran with the narrative. And that was pretty funny to watch go down. But Williams was dealing with an ankle injury all season long. It was so bad that he couldn't practice like at all. He would go to meetings and then go to rehab. Saturdays, he would get his ankle heavily taped, head out onto the field and play, and then it was back to rehab and recovery and meetings. He told us that he was less than 60% all season long, which was certainly a factor in his numbers and totals from the year. Only 5 sacks last season, but even on a bad ankle that had him playing at just a little over half of his ability, he played in 12 games, over 400 snaps for the second time in 3 years. And not only on that ankle that was injured, but that he re-aggravated the injury twice throughout the season. So because of that, he's going to do most of his pre-draft work at Georgia's Pro Day as his recovery continues. He talked about how going to Georgia was incredible for him in terms of how to become a pro and not just excel on the field, but also how to excel off of the field. And the biggest thing, though, was when he talked about versatility, which is something that I think the Bucs would be very interested in. He said he can play inside linebacker. He can play outside linebacker. He can stand up. He can put his hand in the dirt and be a down lineman. And this is where the Bucs could find themselves that chess piece. Todd Bowles used that term a lot last offseason, that he had these chess pieces. Mykel Williams from Georgia could be one of those because of that versatility, where he can line up at so many different positions. He can line up opposite of Kalijah Cansey there on the defensive line. So you would have a line of Williams and Vita and Cansey. You can stand him up opposite of Yaya Diaby. You can bring him along with Dennis and Yaya. You can bring him with Brett. You can do so many different things with Williams. And the amount of mismatches that Bowles could create by adding Williams to the roster would really be a lot of fun to watch, especially when you know the offense has to account for wherever he is, setting up opportunities for other guys on the other side of the field. Williams could be the guy that benefits from the attention that goes to Vita or Cansey or Diaby, or it could be Williams that the offense has to point out and shift coverage to. And now all of a sudden you get Yaya or Cansey with the one-on-one opportunity that they can take advantage of. And he said that he has mentioned to all the teams that he has spoken to about the extent of that ankle injury that he was dealing with last year, and said that he was allowing them to make their own decisions about him. And he wasn't trying to talk them into anything. He was just honest with them about his situation and allows them to evaluate the tape with that in mind. Whatever direction they go is the direction that they go. But ultimately, I find Williams to be a much more viable first-round option than I did just a couple of days ago. And honestly, he might impress teams enough that he goes ahead of where the Bucs are drafting. Right now, it's kind of, you look at Williams, you look at Shamar Stewart, and you're like, these are the guys that'll probably fall to the Bucs at 19. I'm not even sure that Williams is going to get out of the top 15 if he continues to impress. That Georgia Pro Day is going to be massive for him, to prove that he's ready to roll and that ankle isn't bothering him anymore. More combine coverage coming your way. That is next on today's episode of Locked On Bucs, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you again for making Locked On Bucs your first listen or view every day. For your second listen, check out the Locked On NFL Draft with Damian Parson and Keith Sanchez. Now that the season is over, get the latest draft rankings, rumors, and news every day. Find the Locked On NFL Draft podcast on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. So I did have the chance to speak with both Captain Jacks, and I'm talking about Jack Kiser and I'm talking about Jack Sawyer, two linebackers that met in the national championship. And that was really a big talking point for both. And, the big takeaway from both guys was, them being involved in that national championship. And they offered the same sentiment that the extended playoff and the longer year wasn't just good for college football. Sawyer mentioning that the two teams that battled for the championship wouldn't have even made the playoffs in previous years under the old format, but that it helped them understand and prepare for the length of an NFL season. And that's not really something that a lot of these college players have had the opportunity to do. Both of them talked about how it helped them maintain their regiments, their routines into what would be the final stretch of an NFL season, and the added pressure of being in elimination games in December, in January, kind of prepared them for what a playoff push at the end of an NFL season would be like. So this kind of experience is going to go a really long way, not just for Jack Sawyer and Jack Kiser, but really for any of these players coming out of Ohio State and Notre Dame, in kind of their recognition now of all of these other rookies that have hit that rookie wall that we see so often. These guys have already pushed through it. They've already played through it. They understand the preparation and the I can't think of the right term right now, but they understand how to pace themselves a little bit better in order to get through that kind of a stretch. Now, for Sawyer, he spoke quite a bit about what he thinks of himself as a prospect, and that he feels that his ability to rush the passer is somewhat underrated and overlooked. And he mentioned that he felt that he proved himself late in the year and into the playoffs that's an area of his game where he actually can thrive. So Sawyer finished the year with 9 sacks. 6 of those came within the final 6 games, if you include the playoffs. He had 2 against Oregon in the playoffs. He had 1 against Texas on top of that scoop and score that sealed the game. And one of the other media members asked him about the art of the scoop and score. Sawyer had 2 of them last year alone, and how he kind of prepares for that. And Sawyer said that to him, it was all about focusing on the angle of the ball and making sure that you secure it before you begin running. And that's something that we see so often in not just the NFL, but in college football, where these guys try to scoop up the ball and they end up dropping it because they're so focused on looking to where they're supposed to run or where they can run that they don't secure the ball first. And for Sawyer, he puts the securing of the football ahead of everything else, because if nothing else, if worst case scenario, if you secure the ball, you still give it to your offense. You may not score a touchdown on defense, but at least your offense is getting it rather than bobbling a ball and allowing the offense to be able to recover. But it's that level of concentration that Sawyer uses in every aspect of his game. And then, of course, he also mentioned the loss to Michigan, that it galvanized and rallied the Ohio State Buckeyes together to push them to winning that championship. That sense that they had a second chance that they would not have had in previous years, to prove that they were better than what they showed against their biggest rival. And that was a huge reason that team went on to win the national championship. As for Kiser, he stuck around for a sixth year at Notre Dame for a lot of different reasons, but primarily he wanted to play in the new playoff format, but also he wanted the chance to be a captain of the Fighting Irish and help bring along the next wave of Notre Dame football. That went hand in hand with his message that everything that he's done was a result of the work that he has put in, whether it was on the field, in the weight room, in the film room, in position meetings, whatever it was. He's relentless in working on his craft, and that's where his ability to drop into pass coverage really comes into play. He went into great detail about the discipline and preparation that goes into the technique that he's developed over the years, focusing on watching film of the guys that he knows he's going to have to go up against, whether or not they're the kind of player that he's got to be physical with up at the line, bump them, get them off of their route, or if it's the kind of player that if he initiates that contact, they're going to be able to shake him, and now he's going to get burnt. So he is a relentless and very methodical film watcher in order to prepare for the kind of guys that he has to go up with, because he said it's so important to know their techniques and where they thrive so that you can try to get them off their game and not end up getting embarrassed because they're able to burn you so easily. And he said those kinds of situations pop up more and more and more because of the level of athletes that they have to go against. Again, that's the kind of linebacker that you're looking to add to this team, someone that you can trust in coverage. I'm not saying that the Bucs should only look to draft Kiser or Bassa, but I still view Kiser as less of a pure linebacker and more of a defensive weapon, because he can line up all over the place. I think he had, I don't have the number in front of me, but I think it was something like over 200 snaps in slot for Notre Dame. So, he measures at the same size as Bassa, but honestly, in person, he looks smaller than what Bassa did. Both are listed at 6'2", around 230, 235, but Kiser seems to be more of a coverage linebacker, a ball hawk for sure, which Todd Bowles said that he wants, but he is more of a coverage guy, whereas Bassa is more well-rounded. His all-around game is a little bit better, but that's why Bassa is, a day 2 prospect. Kiser is still a day 3 prospect. But with that said, if Bassa goes ahead of the Bucs pick in the 3rd round, getting Kiser in the 4th, that's a pretty excellent consolation prize. My final thoughts and reaction to a Buccaneers roster move, that is coming up next on today's episode of Locked On Bucs. Wrapping things up here from Indianapolis on the Locked On Bucs podcast. And a few other players that I got the chance to hear from were Shamar Stewart, Jalen Walker, Nick Scourton, David. By the way, David Harrison says hi to all of you. He and I chatted quite a bit. But David pronounced Scourton's name a little different than what I've heard, so I'm not sure the exact pronunciation. But the other edge rusher from Texas A&M, Jay Higgins, was another interesting guy to hear from. But the last guy that I'm really going to talk kind of in depth about is linebacker Jahad Campbell. So, look, I really liked Shamar. He definitely does not lack confidence, but he also doesn't come across as someone who thinks that he's walking into the NFL as the best player in the world. It's more of a not acknowledgement of where he knows he is, but also where he knows he can be depending on the work that he puts in. And one of the things that he said is the only one that can stop me is me. So, that kind of attitude, that kind of confidence is something that you like to see, especially in your defensive players. And while Stewart is linked to the Bucs in a lot of mock drafts, I'm not sure that he gets there. There's already buzz around Indianapolis that he's going to be closing in on being in the top 10. So he's going to be probably just outside in that kind of like 12, 13 range. But as far as Jahad Campbell is concerned, that guy, he's going to be a lot of fun in the NFL. He really, really is. He's another versatile weapon that would play extremely well in a Todd Bowles defense. And yes, he is an off-ball linebacker, but he prides himself, and I cannot stress that enough, on being able to also line up on the outside. He also, he prides himself on his ability to also get after the quarterback. An inside-outside hybrid that could create some really, really big problems for offenses when he's on the field with Levante, Yaya, Servassier, Cansey, Vita. Any of those guys is going to be a problem considering how and where they can be deployed from. So one of the things that Campbell talked to us about was that he grew up in Jersey. And it's interesting to hear kind of the background on some of these guys. Like that was one of the first things that Campbell led off with was, he's from Jersey. Jack Kiser talked about how he's from a town of fewer than 800 people, and it might be the smallest city represented here at the scouting combine. But Campbell said that Jersey, it's part of the culture there, that guys just automatically have a chip on their shoulder, that they feel, an ingrained sense to go out and prove themselves no matter what. And that mentality is a big reason why he is where he is right now. However, one thing that I thought was really interesting was that he said his favorite thing to do on defense is line up in Tampa 2, because opposing teams often overlook his coverage abilities. And he said that a lot of them don't think that he can cover because of his size. But that's where he's been able to make a lot of his plays, because he is so easily overlooked and easily dismissed when he drops back into pass coverage. He had 5 passes defensed, 2 interceptions, 2 forced fumbles, 3 fumble recoveries, and 184 tackles in 3 seasons. But last year was the breakout season. 117 tackles, 12 of his 16 career tackles for loss, and then 5 sacks all last season. There's a reason that Campbell is in the mix to go in the first round as an off-ball linebacker, and he might be the only one at that position to be drafted in the first round, but it's because he's an absolute baller. PFF grades from last year, a 76.3 in pass rush, an 81 in run defense, and then an 80.1 in pass coverage. He was number 1 at linebacker for coverage stops last season with 30. He dominated Michigan. He dominated LSU. He dominated Georgia. This guy can be an absolute beast. Now, of course, I'll talk to corners and safeties tomorrow, but the Bucs are in really, really great shape with some of these guys as options with their first pick. But beyond that, some of these guys are going to be incredible options in the second, third, fourth round. As the Bucs continue to get deeper in this process, there are going to be corners and no safeties that are going to go in the first round, but there are going to be some corners that can be available for the Bucs at 19. Interested to hear who they've been talking to, as well as kind of where some of these other corners see themselves. Much like I did with the edge rushers and the linebackers, but the draft gurus are not lying about this draft. The strength is finding so many starting caliber players into the third day because there aren't a ton of elite prospects. There are positions that are loaded with starting talent. And luckily for the Bucs, a lot of those positions are ones that they need to address. But that like ultra elite talent, there's only like a dozen of those kinds of players. But there's just so many starters that are going to be coming out of this draft. Finally, before we get out of here, the news dropped while I was in the media room over at the Indiana Convention Center. And this came courtesy of Mike Garafolo that the Bucs would not be exercising their option for Jordan Whitehead this year. He will hit free agency. Bowles talked to the media yesterday about the possibility of Tyke Smith moving to starting safety next to Antoine Winfield Jr. Izien returning to slot corner, which is very, very much in the cards now for the Buccaneers. And if that's the way that it goes, and that's the decision that the Bucs make, I think they're in a good spot. I really do. There could be times where Bowles switches Izien and Tyke, moves Tyke up to the slot, drops Izien way back in coverage. But with that said, my preference is to leave Tyke at slot, and then you either draft or sign another starting safety. And that way you have Izien as a depth piece at both corner and safety. I mentioned Justin Simmons as a free agent that I would love the Bucs to be in on. And then there are going to be guys that will be talking to the media tomorrow, like Xavier Watts, Sebastian Castro. Those are guys that Tampa could take on day 2. They would come in and immediately start. I mentioned Malachi Moore from Alabama as a player that I like late on day 3. He would be a depth option and continue to develop potentially into a starter. There are a couple of other late draft safeties, 7th round, 6th round kind of guys that could come in and be solid depth as they develop and, of course, contribute on special teams in the meantime. But, safety is certainly a position of need for the Bucs, more so than it already was. We had already been talking about them needing a safety. Now without Jordan Whitehead, there are multiple spots that are going to have to be filled. But this move frees up $4.5 million in cap space. And we kind of knew it was coming because of that money. And although Jason Light talked about how much the team loves Jordan and they would like to have him next year, it wasn't going to be at that price. Not for the production that he put out, not for the poor decision that he made that caused him to miss the last week of the season and the playoff game against the Commanders. And I'm not honestly sure that Whitehead settles for a backup role for less money in Tampa when he could have the opportunity to go elsewhere and potentially be back in a starting lineup somewhere. So, I think Jordan Whitehead's return to Tampa is one and done. I don't think he returns. The Bucs may try, but I just don't see it happening. Of course, you also have Mike Edwards that the Bucs could bring back after he signed with the team late in this year, or about halfway through the year. He's certainly an option that the Bucs could be interested in bringing back, and probably wouldn't cost much more than what they were about to pay Jordan Whitehead. But I'm going to be dropping another episode Friday afternoon. Tomorrow I'll be heading from Indy back home, then up to Columbus, back home. I'll drive back out to Indy Friday morning. So I'm going to go ahead and record the Friday episode once I return from Indy in the afternoon. So that should be up late afternoon, maybe early evening there on Friday. I'll talk about the corners. I'll talk about the safeties, and then might be hitting you with a bonus episode on Saturday, with whatever happens on Friday with some of the other prospects and people that I'll get to talk to. So make sure you keep an eye out for that. In the meantime, though, please check out everything going on Twitter at Locked On Bucs, at @JYarcho_Bucs. Make sure that you are following along on YouTube with those notifications turned on, as well as wherever you get your podcasts. And of course, you can become a Locked On Bucs insider. Go to joinsubtext.com/LockedOnBucs, or you can click the link in the show notes. Hope you all have an absolutely outstanding day. Stay safe, stay healthy, fire the cannons. I want to thank you so much for joining me right here on Locked On Bucs, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.